First of all, thank you for choosing session one. Welcome, everybody. Thanks to UNIDO, thanks to LKDF for organizing this. Thanks to CEDA as well. And thank you to my two guests for joining us today. We're going to talk about a quite exciting topic. We're going to talk about skills anticipation and what we can do with modern technologies such as AI and big data to really help us better understand skill needs and skill demand. Really, everybody is talking about, and you will hear this a lot throughout this session about upskilling, reskilling, lifelong learning, etc. But the question remains, what are the skills to learn? So what skills make sense from a worker, from the perspective of the individual? What skills make sense for the individual to learn, and what skills make sense from a societal perspective to include in curriculums and encourage the teaching of? And really to answer this question and to make sure that people are prepared, not just for the present labor market, but also beyond the present labor market, we really have to answer the question of what are future skills needs and how do we anticipate those skills? In order to answer that question, the three of us are coming together today, and I'm very, very happy to introduce Michael Fung from SkillsFuture Singapore and Gary Gan from JobKred. And I would suggest that we'll start with a little bit of a personal introduction and maybe also introducing the organization that we represent and the work that we do in maybe 2 to 3 minutes each. Great. So Michael, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Simon. And I'm really glad to be on this panel session discussing this topic. It's something that's very close to my heart, both personally and professionally. So professionally, I've been in the area of development work for most of my career. In the last 15 years in the field of education and now in education training. And I think what really fascinates me is, when we think about the science behind learning, and it's not just the cognitive science and neurological aspects, but it's also the human factors around, how to get learners motivated, how to organizations support learning, and so on. And so the organization I'm with, SkillsFuture Singapore, we are a government agency. We report into the Ministry of Education here in Singapore. And our vision is to build an integrated education training system and to nurture a nation of lifelong learners. In the past 6 years, we've been building out the SkillsFuture movement. I think some of you might have heard of it. The focus is largely on workforce skills development and lifelong learning, but we serve all population segments, companies and workers across all industry sectors. We work with multiple stakeholders and partners to bring about that integrated system of education and training. And can talk a little bit more about that later on in the panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Gary?
All right. Hey, hi, everyone. It's Gary from JobKred. So I'm the founder and co-founder and CEO of JobKred. We are a Singapore-based AI-powered workforce transformation and skills intelligence company. So we focus on using skills intelligence to help companies and countries make better decisions in developing their workforce. So what we have worked on projects previously, for example, with World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and UNESCO, were research projects about the skills demand and skills supply in certain countries. So of course, being a big data company, we tend to use the big data approach of looking at online labor market information to provide, to research and provide this sort of quick real-time information. But I echo Michael's sentiments in the sense that, just getting data is one aspect of the whole equation, right? It's also about what can you do with the data? What are the limitations of collecting such data? What's the strengths and weaknesses? And as well as how can you create other factors around this learning ecosystem, like as Michael mentioned, learning demand or providing the right training guidance for training providers, et cetera, right? What we specialize in JobKred is working with the enterprise. So we work a lot with companies from small companies to Fortune 500 multinational companies around how do they develop their own workforce to meet the changing needs of the economy and the industry. So there's a lot of statistics that show that up to 40% of people's skills need to change over the next few years. How does a company keep up with this pace of change? How can they manage their own development of their people? And these are the things that I'll be happy to chat about later during the session as well.
Great, thank you, Gary. A couple of words about myself. My name is Schmid. I work for a company called SkillLab, and I'm responsible for our interactions with the public sector. SkillLab, we're a social business from Amsterdam, and we really try to use artificial intelligence to help people explore, capture, and express their skills, and provide better data-driven, personalized career orientation at scale leveraging AI and big data. And one part of that is obviously figuring out what jobs, what careers make sense for the future of people, what skills make sense for people to explore in education. So we work on skills anticipation as well. However, I think it's quite well known that Singapore is doing an incredible job at this, and might be a bit ahead other countries there. So I'm very glad to have Michael and Gary here to learn a little bit from them and see what they have to say about this. First of all, a couple of words on the state of play here. So traditionally, in order to figure out the skill demand and what occupations are in demand, qualitative analysis such as establishments, skill surveys, going into the field, interviewing people about what skills they use at work, and quantitative approaches that really just look at industry codes or occupation proxies were really the only thing that was out there to figure out what occupations were in demand. And it didn't very often go down to the level of skills. So these traditional tools to establish, first of all, skills availability, but also the demand for skills falls short and are more and more being replaced by these approaches that utilize AI, big data, and really leverage technology to explore how we can better understand the skills demand. I think, as I mentioned before, Singapore is at the forefront of this, and the work that SkillsFuture and JobKred are doing on this is incredible. So I think in order to introduce the concept and methodologies and how this works in practice, especially in an economy where data availability is great, there's a lot of online job vacancy data, etc., and it's sort of contained smaller ecosystem in Singapore. I think it would be great, Michael, Gary, if you could introduce your work, and through that work we can better understand how big data and AI are really used to anticipate skills and to get an idea of what the skill demand looks like, and also how that skill demand can then be used to, first of all, from an individual perspective to guide people, but also from a political perspective to design pathways and see how people can, or see how societies can respond to the ever more technologically driven, COVID-driven change in skill demand that we're experiencing.
Simon, so let me maybe jump in and I'll talk a little bit about how we're approaching this from a policy perspective, but I'll give you some specific examples of what we're doing. I think Gary can share more about specifics around the technologies and so on, but you can take it forward as well. So I think if you look at Simon, you hit the nail on the head, right? The traditional approaches towards skills anticipation is pretty clunky, and as I think about the process that we undertook in Singapore, it was a very traditional approach in the past. We would form industry consortiums. We would go around the table and talk about what are the job families, the skills that are needed for different jobs. We compile all of that. We carry out more consultations with the industry to validate the skills. And through that, we developed 34 skills frameworks that are relevant to the Singapore economy, covering about 80% of our GDP. And each skills framework is like a 400, 500-page document. It takes us about a year and a half to develop. And by the time we publish it, it's a little outdated, but the amount of content is just very difficult to consume for different stakeholder groups. But that was a start that we started that way. And these skills frameworks are open access. You're welcome to, I'll put it in a chat, you're welcome to take a look at them for different industry sectors. So in the recent years, we've realized we need a much more agile approach. We need a near real-time way of being able to look at the kinds of jobs, the skills needs, right, and anticipate what's needed for each industry sector and job type. And so we've taken the skills frameworks that we've developed, put that into a skills taxonomy. There are about 11,000 items in there. We scrape job boards for latest jobs, and we analyze the kinds of skills that are articulated in the job ads. We look at various sources of data, we put that into the repository, and then we start mining it. It's very laborious. It was still in the process of building out that database and repository, but I'll say that it has proven to be quite helpful. I'll just give an example of a real example that we embarked on during COVID. So because of COVID, a number of industry sectors were badly affected, like tourism, the hospitality sector, marine and offshore, air transportation, and so on. We took the skills profiles of the workers that were displaced, and we were able to use the database to look at adjacent skills and adjacent jobs. And with that, we were able to offer very specific interventions to these groups of displaced workers to take them from jobs that they were lost into jobs that were still growing, and to look at what are the skills top-ups that were required, and to offer those training interventions. So that was a very practical way of leveraging on a database that we could analyze in a near real-time basis. So that's an example how we've built up the skills anticipation system and skills analysis system in the Singapore context.
Great, and you've worked in this work, especially, I think the data analysis part is where you really work with Gary, right? So where JobKred comes into the mix. Gary, maybe you can speak a little bit about the work that's required once that data is collected from online job vacancy databases, from that taxonomization work that was done beforehand. What does it take? What is coming in terms of big data analysis, and how does that function from your perspective?
Yep. So I'd like to share specifically on the perspective from a developing economy kind of approach, because Singapore, being a developed economy, there's a lot of data online, there's a lot of capabilities to mine and analyze that data that may be inherent within the government's people already, right? So we find for developing countries, you have multiple problems. First of all, that quality and quantity of data may not exist in the first place, right? For example, Singapore has its own national jobs portal, national skills portal as well, that they can get data directly from. But if you look at other countries, that may not even exist in the first place. And second, of course, a lot of developing countries may not have the ability and the technology to be able to make that data analysis or even AI elements of it possible, right? So that's where a company like ours and yours as well, Simon, would come in to be able to bridge that gap, to first of all kind of provide that capability, but also provide that sort of experience and technological platforms, for example, to make that faster to scale. So I want to share an example of what we did let me think. We did some projects with in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Indonesia, Israel, Palestine. Basically, the biggest problems we find is that first, you have to look at the country's available data. So let's say Sri Lanka, for example. Sri Lanka, we had to go down with the Asian Development Bank, I recall, to look at what was available online. So we had to do our own desktop research to work with the government officials to find out what are the sources of data available in terms of online job vacancies, right? And we did what Michael mentioned. I actually went down to Colombo and met a few industry people and had that kind of focus group discussions just to kind of get that baseline sort of understanding, right? But you realize very quickly that that's not scalable, obviously. So then looking at the online job boards out there, we found one. Then we actually negotiated with the CEO to get years of data. So the good thing about getting years of data about job postings and online job vacancies is that you can build time series. You can build and understand how that demand of skills changes, how the demand for job changes over time. Whereas if you're doing just mining online, it tends to directly from scraping job portal websites, you tend to only look at maybe the last 3 or 6 months, because most job portal sites don't really list anything more than that. They won't list 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So if you work with the primary source and you're able to negotiate to get that packet of data, that makes it more powerful for you to research. And then secondly, of course, you can either research yourself or you can find a third party like ourselves to be able to use the taxonomies and the technologies to analyze that data quickly. And then from there, you can then find out okay, what's the in-demand skills today? How has it changed over time? For example, this particular job title, as the skills evolved over time, is it hard skills, soft skills? What are the technologies being used, for example? And that gives you that snapshot of what's going on the online world. But of course, clearly that may be limitations. Generally for, let's say, Sri Lanka, for example, the postings were limited to the metropolitan areas, cities, right? So like Colombo, etc. So you're kind of limited to. It's not always white collar jobs. Sometimes they put jobs like cashier, driver, etc. Blue collar jobs, but it is limited geographically, and you're not getting the data from informal hiring, which can be quite big in certain developing countries. So again, I don't claim and I don't think that a country should only depend on one data source, obviously, right? But I must say that online job vacancy data can be very quick and effective to get. But again, it's just a snapshot, especially for developing countries. You kind of still have to do the traditional methods a little bit as well, where you kind of find out from qualitative kind of research, what is the trends in the informal hiring, for example. So that's just one example of what we did for Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point that you made there, Gary, that this distinction between formal and informal economy job, and even in more developed economies, there are certain jobs in certain areas that never reach an online job vacancy board, right? So where the data availability just is not there, and where you're not able to scrape and develop demand frameworks based on that. You also touched on another important point there, and that's the presence of the taxonomy, right? We built our product based on the European Union taxonomy, the ESCO framework. I know Singapore developed its taxonomy last year. I think, is that right, Michael, last year? Or finalized last year. So there is an importance of a skills taxonomy. And I think that's another question that I find quite interesting, is the applicability of a taxonomy developed for, let's say, the EU or for Singapore in the context of a more developing economy. So, for example, in our work in Kenya or in your work in the Philippines and Sri Lanka. So, how do you bridge that gap if you come from a background, if you come from a taxonomy that really is meant for a more developed economy, but want to use it for a more developing context?
Yeah, Simon and Gary, those are great points, right? I'm very mindful that when I talk about the journey that we undertake in Singapore, we have rather unique context and availability of data and so on, and so that helps us in the process. But in many countries that around the region and with policymakers that we interact with, those preconditions are not there. But I would echo Gary's point that data is key. Perhaps we may not have the full set of data, but we need sufficient data to be able to make sense of what's going on. And a lot of the challenges today that I see in labor markets is policymakers don't have a good handle on what's really going on in the labor markets. So I think, from our perspective, there are quite a number of companies out there, private sector companies, that are collecting good data, right? So, JobKred being one of them, partners that we work with. Another one would be Burning Glass Technologies. They have fairly granular data in many different countries. But LinkedIn is a source of data as well. Lots of limitations, but some source of data. And so our view is that we would ingest multiple sources of data to try to get a sense of what's really going on. And so whether we are looking at resource, endowed countries or resource poor countries, I think getting some degree of usable data is important. And I think Gary can talk about that in the Sri Lankan context. But I think there's also no need to reinvent the wheel. When we think about the types of, let's take tourism, for example, the types of jobs that are available for the tourism industry is fairly similar across different countries. And maybe there are a few differences here and there, but the large framework is fairly similar. I would also say that ICT, Infocom technologies, fairly similar and universal. So I would think that countries can adapt from work that's been done in other parts of the world to develop their own version that fits their context. And what's very important as well is it has to be aligned with the economic growth strategy of the country to focus on those sectors that are crucial in the development of the country, and then find ways to adapt it. And we've done that in Philippines, for example. The Philippines government had worked with us, and the business associations have worked with one another across the two countries and adapted the skills frameworks that we produced for the Filipino context. And they've launched, I believe, 2 frameworks earlier this year, 2 more to come, and they're looking at implementing the skills frameworks now within the Filipino context. So I think there are models, development models that you can follow in adapting these products to the different needs of the different countries.
Yes, certainly. I also one interesting aspect that was brought up in the first session today, in the welcoming session, was the aspect of remote work, and I couldn't help but think that that is another way to bridge the skills demand challenge. If you're actually if you're offering remote job opportunities for workers in developing countries that are situated in developed economies where we have better insight into what skills are needed, right? So if we, for example, know if we know that there's a lot of IT security professionals, I think that was one of the examples used in the session. If there are a lot of IT security professionals needed in a certain country and they're willing to hire remotely, that might be another way to bridge that information gap to actually to use that digital inclusion framework. And if there's internet connection and the ability to work remotely available, that might be another development framework where the availability of data, the lack of availability of data in the local context becomes less important if the work itself is less bound to location. But yeah, these are all very interesting points. Very similar to what I just mentioned I just wanted to bring up this example from our own work in our work with the World Food Program, MPACT program, where we prepare students for remote work through classes in software development. And those classes in software development, there's a clear established need in developed countries, but the program is delivered to developing countries. And I think that brings us to another point, which is really the individual skill pathway, not just from a societal perspective, but looking at what the individual can do. And I think, Michael, you brought this up with the adjacency of people who lost their job during COVID, but were able to find jobs in adjacent careers or in careers on occupations where the skill demand for those occupations is adjacent, and the transition is very easy and straightforward. So I think there's a little bit of a point that focus on the skill demand and anticipating the skills that I need is great, but there's also, in order to design individual pathways, there needs to be some idea of the available skills supply and what people whose jobs are, who are out of work or whose occupations are in danger of becoming obsolete. What skills do they have, and how do we design pathways that both respect the skills demand, so what the market wants, but also the skills supply, so what the market no longer needs, essentially.
So, sorry, can I add a little bit about the taxonomy topic?
Sure, yeah.
So one thing we found, exactly echoing what Michael's statements were, is that countries need to know what is their economic kind of goals before they plan their own taxonomies and frameworks, right? For example, one of the limitations of looking at your online job vacancy data is that it's actually looking at the past, to be a little frank, right? It's actually looking at maybe the last 3-6 months if you're lucky at the closest stage, but it's not really looking at what are the transformational technologies that you really want to encourage within your companies in the next few years. So sometimes we do tell countries that, hey, look, you can reference other countries' data or taxonomies as well, but you still definitely have to customize it to the context of your country. Because every country tells me they want to do ICT, every single country out there, but it does require a baseline sort of ability and even infrastructure. So when I went to certain countries, they may not even have computers available. Students have to share computers for their ICT classes. Can you imagine that? So it's not easy for them to really bridge that gap quickly. So it's something that honestly countries need to think about. Do they really want to all leapfrog into the ICT age and have everybody learning ICT skills, all sharing one computer? 100 people sharing a computer? That doesn't make sense, right? So these are certain things that are important. And then second, the point about personalization, as Simon mentioned, right? Absolutely essential as well. Frameworks are great, but they are frameworks, they are starting points. We find that the challenge would be for the individual or the company on how do they utilize this framework in the context of themselves or their company's context, right? So similar to the country's context. When we work with companies, we find that we also use Singapore Skills Framework as a reference point for Singapore and multinationals that we work with, but invariably they all need to customize it, right? Because not every company will believe that, I want skill ABC in my company, for example. I want skill E actually, right? So these are things that has to be done at scale for the individual as for the company. And that's where, of course, technologies like AI will come in to make it feasible.
And Simon, if I could jump in on your point about remote work, I think it's interesting because the model you've talked about is leveraging on experts outside of your geographic location, because you might not have the skills here, leverage it somewhere else. But as I think about from a developing country perspective, if they're able to figure out or sense what are the industry skills needs out there, not just at the top end, but the middle tier skills and sometimes even lower tier skills, and be able to offer those skills at scale to companies and countries that require that kind of skill sets, then therein lies a possible economic development strategy. And I think countries have done that very successfully for, say, the BPO industry in the past. But now with remote work, you can actually extend the range of job roles that can be delivered remotely. And if you develop skilled workforce in those segments, it would complement the needs of many of these developed countries where we're facing declining birth rates, shrinking labor force, and so on. So that has a flip opportunity as well.
Yeah, that is a great point. That not just to stay in this remote work arrangement forever, but to create the infrastructure and the structure within the country to provide the full service there, and not just be a single service provider, essentially. Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's very clear that companies want to go where the available talent is, right? In many cases, especially for more mid to high skill jobs. Yeah, that's a great point. I think I had this is a specific question to Singapore, and it goes back more to the macro approach. So how do you in Singapore specifically use this collected data, the aggregate data, to really design education and training curriculum? Because I know Singapore is very, very focused on lifelong learning, and there's this credit system to allow people to take courses and to upskill and reskill continuously. So how do you use the data that you collect through SkillsFuture to inform the curriculum, to inform choices, and also in the same way, how do you guide people to make choices that are in their interest, or inform them enough so that they make choices that are in their interest?
Yeah, so if I think about how we use the data, and perhaps I can elaborate a little bit more about how we construct our skills frameworks. For each industry sector, we look at what are the job families within the sector. And for each job family, we map out the 6 levels of jobs, from entry level all the way up to executive level. And then for each job, we look at what are the technical skills that are needed, the soft skills, transversal skills, 21st century skills that are needed, whatever term you might call it. We call them critical core skills. We also try to anticipate what are the emerging and future skills that will be needed for the job, including let's say, the impact of automation, impact of digitalization. What impact would that have on the skills needed for that particular job? And we then publish a skills frameworks and establish a common language, if you would, as we talk about how industries are shifting and jobs are shifting. We then share that information with our training industry, and this includes private training providers, our public institutes, polytechnics, our universities, and so on, and companies that might be conducting their own training. And we use that as a way to guide the curriculum and course design, as well as the assessment standards that should be put in place to assess the skills level. And courses that are aligned with these, the taxonomy and skills, are supported by us through course fee funding and other forms of support. To individuals, for individuals, we publish abridged versions of that information in a way that they can understand, with some degree of information about where the industry sector is moving, the kinds of hot jobs that are in that space, the broad types, the top skills that are needed for those jobs. But if they are then interested in specific job roles, they would then have to go into the details of the skills framework. But I must say that the guidance part is probably the most difficult, because this is heavy information. Even for sophisticated users, it is not easy to navigate it. And so we're still working on that to look at how do we break that down. And some parts of having a taxonomy helps, because if you design the taxonomy correctly for the intended stakeholder group, it'll be easier to communicate and be able to understand what we're really talking about. So it's still a work in progress in terms of that, guidance and communication aspects.
Yeah, we've very much had made the same experience, and the career guide, like the skill profiling of the individual, and then providing guidance is really our core capability. But even for us, the taxonomized language is it's very rich. It's a lot to take in. So you really have to find ways to make this understandable and digestible to users who, in our case, are mostly marginalized job seekers, migrants, lower skilled workers, long-term unemployed, etc. So it's a very difficult bridge. It's a very, very difficult gap to bridge to really make this taxonomized, expert developed, very technical language, very technical concepts understandable to the individual. Gary, I'm sure you've also had the guidance aspect and you've had experiences, especially in developing countries, and with maybe a less informed or a less cognizant populace. Do you want to talk about those experiences a bit?
Yeah, I think again, all of us are realizing the scope of the problem. Basically, a taxonomy is not easy to come up with that is ready and for the future as well. But after that, translating it to the people on the ground, which is the individual workers or even the HR people within companies, that is massively difficult because, frankly, we work with a lot of HR and they're great people, but they may not be trained in understanding what is the skills taxonomy, what is a skill even, and they may not be aware of the skills within that particular job family. Right? It's not fair to ask HR to know what skills are necessary for certain roles like IT, etc. Right? So they do struggle sometimes to be able to translate these documents and frameworks into something actionable for the company or for the individual employee, for example. So one of the things that, again, we are starting to realize is that they need help, right? They need support, and they even need education, upskilling themselves, right? So in terms of like what exactly is a skills framework, what is a competency even, how do you actually implement skills development strategies across your company, and how does it impact the individual worker, and how does supervisor come into play, and what sort of data can you collect that is useful for your business strategic decision making or tactical decision making, right? So these are things that I think it's a little bit unforeseen, that the industry and the ground would struggle with. But that's where, people like Simon, yourselves, and myself would come in, right? Our companies would come in to bridge that gap. So what we are doing is to take all that complicated stuff and turn it into something really simple for the ground to understand. You're not showing them like 30, 40 job roles within their family. You're just showing the one that is relevant to them, that is already customized by the company, and they're picking out only 2 or 3 things, or the system only picks up 2 or 3 things to show you, which is just skills gaps. You don't need to know all the other things, right? So it makes it really a good user experience to just tell me what to do next. That's what the people on the ground need to know, right? Tell me what to do next, right? And then from there, of course, you can connect to training, you can connect to careers and all that. So really that difficult part of translating something that is almost a strategy piece of work into something that is an operational or field piece of work is underlooked part of the whole process.
Yeah, that reverberates with me very, very much. Mike, I think Michael made an important point there to that end before. But when you talk about aligning training, national vocational qualification frameworks with skills framework, and kind of making, we always internally talk about the skill being the atom of the work world, where you can break down every occupation, you can break down every individual, and you can break down every educational opportunity or vocational training opportunity into what skills they contain, basically. So I think that the importance of having an understanding on the part of national vocational qualifications framework, ministries of education, etc., that which skills are conveyed through which educational routes and how do they relate to different occupations. That's a really important part, because if you're anticipating these skills, you also need to, let's say skills anticipation works perfectly. It doesn't really help you if you don't know how you then transmit those skills and what you already have and what you may need in terms of curricular design. So I think that's very important, and an important point of the alignment between these different systems that ultimately touch upon employment and lifelong learning. Yeah, well, I think we've talked a lot about the positive aspects and the chances, and however, there are challenges that we have touched upon. But I wanted to ask the two of you specifically about a couple of challenges that, first of all, people always get a little bit scared when they hear AI. It's a term that elicits a positive response, but also a bit of caution. But yeah, how do you make sure from an AI ethics perspective, so from a perspective where you're not actually evaluating people based on AI, where you're not actually having the AI make decisions based on whatever biases may be inherent in the data set that it reads. But are you concerned that the information that you glean that may be somewhat biased towards more high-skilled jobs or bias against certain resumes, profiles, etc.? I know it's a difficult question. Whoever wants to take.
I can take that. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely controversial, right? And I can't recall the article exactly, but I think it's Amazon or one of the bigger tech companies that tried to use a AI bot to screen applicants. And it ended up screening for like a very specific and wrong set based on the previous data, right? So that's some of the ethical implications where, if it's depending on past data, you may end up with like a very non-diversified group of people, or you may end up with even totally wrong type of people, right? Because of the wrong training set that was given. So I think in these early days, especially for something so important as skills development and career development, at least, my personal kind of viewpoint is that you still need an element of human supervision, right? You can call it supervised AI, supervised learning, whatever it is, but what we are offering in our system are recommendations, right? And a human being still needs to take the final action to either click on the course or to say that, hey, out of these 20 people that are recommended as good quality people suitable for the role, let me look at it in more detail, right? And that's the owners of the HR or the owners of the individual themselves to pick properly. So, imagine Netflix giving you recommendations. They can't just play the movie straight away. You got to make a choice yourself. So in that sense, that of course helps to train the AI further. But the main thing is that it gives humans, that sort of ability to filter and to kind of give their own input. I think that's important to have in AI going forwards.
Yeah, fully agreed. The recommendation aspect is important. We see it the same way. We only do recommendation. We don't really do evaluation or assessment. It's guidance, and ultimately it's up to the user and the individual to follow the pathway that they think is best for them. Having received more information about what those pathways may look like. Yes, Michael.
Sorry. Now, so if I can respond to the question you raised, but in a slightly different way, which is in terms of skills anticipation efforts that we are seeing, globally in different countries and globally, are we sufficiently inclusive in the approach that's being taken? In many of the examples I've seen, there's a lot of focus on digital skills, high-tech skills, because presumably that's where corporate demand is, right? Big companies are asking themselves, where's my workforce going with digital skills? What's needed? And so it's easy to focus on that area because you're trying to sell into the big companies. But if you think about what's needed in an economy from an entire perspective, we have to be pretty inclusive. So we should not be just looking at high skills jobs. We should be looking at mid skills and low skills jobs as well. And Gary brought up a great point. There's an even more challenging sector, the informal sector, where identifying the jobs and career pathways for that sector is going to be even more challenging. But just starting with low skills jobs, mid skills jobs, making sure we take an inclusive approach as we map out the skills and anticipate the skill shifts. I think that's what's needed, at a country level, and companies that are able to support that effort for different countries would be doing a great service, for the workforce as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think recently, where we are here in the Netherlands, throughout the last year said there's been a real shortage of qualified carpenters, and that's not something you often, if you read at which 5 jobs are in high demand, it is always very much tech focused, very much ICT focused, even though in many countries there are many manual labor jobs, mid-skill jobs, vocational education and training, apprenticeship type jobs that are in really high demand. that no one seems to be looking at because they don't fit that mold of being a trendy tech job, right? So I think there's a real tendency to ignoring, especially from these expert device, non-data driven jobs of the future type scenarios. It seems to always be sort of tech futurist and not very much grounded in the realities of the labor market we're still in.
Yeah, actually, that's a great examples, right? Because it just brings to mind one of my clients, which is an oil and gas company, and they have a lot of technical roles, right? Technicians, literally just walking around checking, the equipment, and they're worried they don't have many job openings for these technicians because no one's going to join them, because no one wants to work in Singapore, at least, right? In this sort of like physical labor anymore. So these technicians are retiring. They're all 50, 60 years old. They're going to retire. So the CHR is so worried that they cannot replace these people. And thus, the company is forced to digitize. The company is forced to build like IoT and have scanners all around instead of like the person going physically to check the dials, and troubleshooting. It's all in the control center. So at least they hope that younger people will be interested to sit in the office and look at the control center. So it's interesting that maybe online job vacancy data will not show these trends, right? Because they're not actively hiring per se, but there is that critical group in the economy that actually needs to be transformed and needs to be updated, and the whole job role changes. So yeah, it's just thinking about this discussion, I came up, it reminded me of this story.
Yeah.
And Gary, I would say that it's that's a great insight, right? Because if we know that the technician job in the oil and gas sector is being displaced because of the possibility of technology replacing those jobs, then we should be thinking about what's the next generation technicians that we're upskilling for, and make sure that they have the right skills so that they're not going to be displaced, and they will have meaningful jobs. So certainly, I think those are areas that we need to work on.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Also, I think, Gary, you had mentioned this before, that if you're looking at online job vacancies, you're not looking at a picture of the future. You may not even be looking at a picture of the present. Is there a concern that, I think we've all read about this, where most entry-level jobs require 5 years of work experience, require this, require that. Is there a concern that we're replicating by looking at these online job vacancies, that we're replicating existing biases, existing issues that are present in employers' understanding of the needs of a job, right? Because they may not. I think employers may not always be fully conscious of the exact skills that their workers use in their day-to-day. I think we've been doing some work on this. We've been thinking about how to do some work on this to actually create skill profiles of workers and combine the needs of an occupation based on the actual experience of workers who identify themselves or who identify as having had that occupation. But again, how do you address this? How do you think about the issue of, by relying on online job vacancies, basically an employer created need that may not be as up-to-date, responsive, or accurate as we might like.
So as I mentioned, you can't just rely on one type of data source, right? Definitely there are biases within every inherent data source. So you got to take away the weaknesses by having more positives around from other data sources. But I think, again, one thing that is less utilized is referencing other countries who are 3 or 4 steps ahead of you, right? So for example, if, again, Singapore is a few steps ahead in terms of like certain capabilities or data sets that they're trying to encourage in certain industries, that can be a reference point of where you want to have a little bit more to help your local population to get the right skills 3 or 4 years ahead, right? But again, I personally feel that fundamental kind of foundation needs to be built. I really was kind of shocked at that class of having like one computer shared among all the computer students. So these are things that you kind of need to make sure that the foundation is right before you can start to do these 3 or 4 steps ahead, because Singapore has built the infrastructure, has built that, the schools in Singapore are so nice and well equipped and everything. And I've been through the schools there as well. So they took maybe decades or years to kind of get that sort of foundation right. So I think that's important for developing countries to think about.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense to diversify your data source, and maybe again, I think that human touch and having people maybe look at it, maybe amending the big data work with qualitative work, with skill surveys, etc., which may not be as up to date, but which may confirm that you're on the right track, or may confirm some of your priors that you've gotten from your data analysis. I think that's important to be wary of inherent biases in the data that you're looking at, especially as we've talked about, because some jobs, some more low skills may never or may be less likely to hit on their job vacancy boards, especially in the informal economy. I think another issue we're facing is that in many cases occupations are evolving internally. Everybody has talked about, oh, AI is replacing jobs, but it turns out that AI is less replacing jobs than replacing tasks within jobs, right? Where your job will still exist, but it will look slightly different because certain tasks are taken over by an AI or by a machine learning algorithm or whatever it may be, whatever technology it may be. How do we respond to that in terms of skills anticipation? Because we may not see a decline in a certain occupation, but we may see a rebundling of skills needed to be a part of that occupation.
Yeah, Simon, I share that view that it's not about AI replacing jobs, robots replacing human, but it's job tasks that are shifting. And we see that quite clearly, especially through the pandemic, because many businesses had to go online or digitize some of the processes. And we see that, people that are laid off, it's not like the computers came in and everybody got laid off, right? They actually need to adapt the business model, pick up the skills and so on. So it's about job task shifting. So I think there are a few challenges that we see. One is, if AI and technology is changing nature of job tasks at such a rapid speed and scale, how do we respond in a way that's sufficiently agile? And we talked about this earlier. If it takes 1.5 years for consultation and publication and communication, that's too slow. We need to be a lot more quick and agile. And when they say we, not just governments, not just think tanks and companies, not just think tanks, but the companies themselves, your HR functions and individual workers. How do we consume that revise updated information in a near real-time basis? So I think speed is one of the key challenges. The other challenge that we talked a little bit about as well is how to make this massive information, how do we make it understandable to the different audiences and stakeholder groups? That's another big challenge. And I would raise two more challenges that I see. One is around assessment, because when we talk about skills, how do we assess skills and competencies so that we actually know where people are? And there's quite a bit of work in the ICT space. I think maybe ICT is more advanced than other sectors in assessment, but that's critical. And finally, I think it's about recognition. So credentialing and getting recognition from employers based on assessment standards that have been defined, I think that's critical too. And I think those are two big missing pieces right now in the skills development landscape.
Yeah, I fully agree on this assessment and recognition, especially if you're staying within the same economy, staying within the same country, it might be a bit more straightforward. But as soon as you cross a border, or in some European countries, as soon as you cross a state border, your certification may be less recognized, may not be recognized, and the recognition of prior learning, assessment and validation aspect is very important, and especially for outside of ICT jobs where maybe remote assessment or some sort of digital assessment is not possible or more difficult. That's a really difficult bridge. That's a really difficult problem to solve. Gary, any point from you on this, or?
Yep. I echo Michael's sentiments exactly. Like I was going to say the word agility as well. Right? There's no option anymore for companies or countries. Right? There's no option anymore. At the speed at which the world is changing, at which industries are changing, you must be agile. If not, you are going to be obsolete. Right? And that's where a lot of company management understands that. So there's a lot of surveys by McKinsey, PwC that shows that CEOs put skills and lack of skills as a number one priority, but 80% of them don't know how to solve it, going forwards, right? And And I think a lot of it really boils down to this is such an evolving space where not just the management needs to get upskilled about it, but the operational people, the HR especially. Right? We work with HR. Our clients are HR people. And again, as I mentioned, they're great people. They are very passionate about their work. They want to help people, but they really lack that understanding of how to come up with a agile and scalable solution to help the company stay agile, right? And even coming up with skills development, tracking, right? Skills assessments, all these sort of things have never crossed their mind before. So that's something that I'm actually working with the industry in Singapore and different agencies like SSG as well, to be able to also upskill not just HR, but the management about how skills development should be done. And you need to remain agile and you need to use a faster technological approach even, right? So it's very critical. It's very critical to get the whole ecosystem involved in this whole skills transformation agenda. Not just the individual motivation, but also the company's capabilities to do that sort of skills development as well. So that agility, that skills assessments, all these gaps that need to be closed also needs education and training of HR people, I feel, and the companies.
Yeah, we've had the same experience working mostly with employment services and employment intermediaries, where there's a real, we built this interface for the career counselor, for the career advisor, in order for them to understand what a user's skills are, how those skills relate to different occupations on the labor market and to different education options on the labor market. Because it's not just the worker or the job seeker who needs that information. It's also very much the people aiming to assist that worker who may have more access, or who may also need to help that individual to understand the potential pathways. Great. I think we were going to go to do some audience questions, and we have 8 minutes left. So I think it might be time to take a look at what questions were asked, and I believe there was one very much at the beginning. Just Mahdi, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, asked what are the AI subfields or techniques used for skill needs prediction, and what are the related challenges? I believe that might be a question that's aimed at Gary. Or maybe Michael. I don't know who wants to take this.
Gary's the expert, right?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
What are the AI subfields or techniques used for skill needs prediction, and what are the related challenges? I can speak from our perspective that we don't really use the way we use it is to use a natural language processing algorithm to identify, to tag on a job vacancies, tag CVs with skill titles. That's the way we use it. I'm assuming from Gary's assent, I'm assuming they're doing something very similar.
Yeah, I think it's pretty standard that the techniques you use are pretty standard in AI, like natural language processing, hierarchical clustering, collaborative filtering, etc., right? But the way that you apply it, of course, changes in the context. So for us, we use it in things like text to skills, which is natural language processing. Text to skills, recognize text from CVs and the job portals to turn that into that taxonomy of skills. We also do things like applicant or suggested talent, basically candidate to skills requirements ranking, right? We even do things like taxonomy customization, because every company is different. We have to build the architecture that allows everybody to create their own language of skills and even tag skills with their own naming, right? So for example, Singapore Skills Framework may say this skill is a critical core skill, but the company will go on to call it their a cultural skill 101, right? Something like that. So we have to manage and build all these sort of technologies. So in that sense, using AI is just the name for it, but the application of it is important.
Yeah. Addressing the challenges, one challenge that is probably common across us is that many job postings you find on online job vacancies are not particularly well written, may not be comprehensive enough, may not encompass all skills needed for that occupation. Same thing for CVs. Like many CVs we look at are not great in terms of the information they contain. And that's partially why we really emphasize, especially to replace the CV part, is the skill profiling part and actually asking the individual user about what skills they have, how often they've used them, the intensity, etc. Just because in our experience, really the semantic match, the tagging, the NLP tagging of CVs, just because CVs are so insufficient in terms of the information they contain, it's often very difficult. Yeah, I think there were some more questions. I'm scrolling through the chat now. Oh, there was. I think you've answered a lot of them in the chat already, Michael.
Trying to make it life a little bit easier.
Yeah.
No, but those were really good questions on the chat.
Yeah, definitely. And I really appreciate the people participating and being active here. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask them. Is there a good training program? Answer that. Excellent. Okay. I'm trying to see if I missed any questions, but I don't think so. Otherwise, Gary, Michael, do you have any other points that you think is important? I do like to end on this point. Where do you see the field of skills anticipation going? What is if you construct a sort of utopian universe, what does that look like? What are we doing? How does skills anticipation inform training? How does training inform occupations and hiring? How do employers, employment intermediaries, educational training providers, and the government work together? Ideally, what would this look like for you?
Yeah, so Simon, I think you've alluded to that in your question. I think it's we can't look at skills anticipation on its own, right? It doesn't serve a meaningful purpose. We really need to take what I'll call an ecosystem view to what enables skills development. And skills anticipation is very much upstream and very important piece, so we know where we're headed with all these efforts. But I would say that we need to take a multi-stakeholder approach as well, because the problem is too big for any one company or one entity to solve. We need to pull together private sector, public institutions, government agencies, companies, industry associations, and so on. And we need to do that not just in advanced economies, but also low resource, data poor countries. We need that ecosystem approach as well. So I think that's one of the first sort of big thing that we need to think about. And then as we think about the ecosystem, from the ecosystem point of view, I think there are three very important things to work on. One is obviously anticipate, and we talk a lot about that today. Where is the economy going? Where are the jobs going? Where are the skills going? Anticipate and have a view about that. And second then is to make sure that we reduce the barriers, we make it accessible for workers, for companies to be able to upskill themselves. And accessible by delivering in different ways, in making sure that opportunities are inclusive and so on. And the third, I would say, is make it affordable. And so, those who are, currently at risk, as well as marginalized segments, should be offered even greater levels of support so they can continue to be productive in the economy in the future to come. So those three A's, I think, are very important: anticipation, accessibility, and affordability. Thanks.
Maybe I'd like to share just like my personal company's vision on how we want to support skills anticipation. As I mentioned, we are really focusing on what we call skills intelligence, right? And we want to empower companies to be able to have their own skills intelligence about what is the referencing data, but what's the future, referencing what is their current skills, not just looking at CVs. I agree totally with you, Simon, that CVs are a terrible source of data, to be frank, for at least a company, right? For various reasons. But anyway, I want to help companies to be able to understand where they're going, where the skills currently are, and how fast they're moving to close that gap, and aggregate that data in a consolidated manner for certain industries. So that becomes a better source, I feel, than online job vacancies, because again, online job vacancies are a little bit lagging indicators, and secondly, they tend to have a little bit of what I call fluff inside, right? So sometimes you put like cultural statements, just like, really good to have, but they put like 20, 30 technologies there. Are you really looking for someone with all these skills? Are you sure? Because that doesn't exist, Yeah. So in that sense, when we look at enabling skills intelligence for companies, we help them build competency frameworks that are customized to their company. They put the truth. They actually put the things that they want their companies to develop. And I feel that data is very granular, very accurate. So we're doing two things here. We're enabling companies to be agile, but at the same time, we're collecting agile data as well. I hope to feed this hopefully to Michael, and SkillsFuture in the future, that gives a much more nuanced view of how that particular industry is changing. Yeah, so I hope to do that, over multiple industries as well. That's kind of our vision, to use the agile approach to then enable agile data collection.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's 12, so I think we've reached the end of this little discussion, this session number 1. Thank you so much, Michael and Gary. Thanks again to LKDF and Unido, Matthias, Hannah, everybody for organizing this event. Feel free, I think we're all reachable through the chat or through a message. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And thank you so much for attending. I know you had 2 other interesting sessions to choose from. So thanks a lot, everybody, for choosing this one. And yeah, have a good rest of your week, everybody.
And thank you, Simon, for doing a great job facilitating this.
Thanks, Simon, as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Gary.